From the outside, everything about Mason Walker looked picture-perfect. A two-story home in a quiet Ohio neighborhood, a stable job in finance, a loving wife named Rachel, and two teenage kids who hadn't yet hit their rebellious years. But deep down, Mason felt a nagging emptiness, a constant hum beneath the surface, as though life had more to offer than spreadsheets and late-night sports shows. It all started the week Mason turned 50. The candles on his birthday cake flickered out as he blew them with an enthusiastic but unsure grin. The family clapped and someone joked, "Halfway to 100." Mason laughed, but that night, he lay in bed wide awake, staring at the ceiling and wondering what he had really done with those 50 years. Had he lived meaningfully? Had he done anything that mattered? That week, Mason decided to visit his father's old cabin up north. His dad had passed away 5 years earlier, leaving the place untouched. Mason hadn't been back since the funeral. He called Rachel and told her he needed a weekend alone, just to clear his mind. She understood, more than he expected. When Mason pulled up to the cabin, the pine trees towered above him like old sentinels. The air was crisper than he remembered. It smelled of earth and pine and a bit like history. As he opened the creaky front door, dust particles danced in the afternoon light. Everything was as it had been the last time. Old books stacked on the table, fishing rods in the corner, and his dad's weathered recliner facing the fireplace. He built a small fire and sat in silence, letting the crackling logs keep him company. That's when he noticed a leather-bound journal resting on the mantelpiece. He didn't remember seeing it there before. Dusty but intact. He picked it up and recognized his dad's handwriting on the first page. "For Mason. When you're ready." Mason hesitated. He ran his fingers across the cover before opening it. Inside were pages filled with life reflections, thoughts, and stories. His father's legacy in ink. The first entry stopped him cold. Lesson 1. Time doesn't wait for anyone, son. It'll pass whether you're living or just existing. Mason reread that line. He thought about all the years he'd been on autopilot, going through routines, chasing promotions, worrying about mortgages and retirement plans. When had he last done something purely for joy? Something that made him feel alive? The next entry read, Lesson 2, people matter more than things. Don't wait to say, I love you. You can't hug a bank account. That one hit even harder. Mason loved his family, fiercely, but he couldn't remember the last time he'd said it without a holiday prompting it. Rachel had stood by him through job stress, family struggles, and every emotional storm, but he often treated her like a co-manager rather than the love of his life. His kids, Jake and Madison, were growing up fast, and Mason realized he'd missed so many little moments chasing something bigger that never came. Mason read through the journal late into the night. Each lesson pulled him deeper into reflection. Lesson 3. Regret is heavier than failure. Try even if you fall. At least you'll sleep knowing you dared. That one reminded him of his old dream of opening a fishing gear store. He used to sketch designs and logos, even picked out a name, Walker's Real World. But he let it fade, scared it wouldn't be practical. The next morning, Mason walked down to the nearby lake. The surface was still and peaceful. Sitting on the dock, journal in hand, he whispered, I get it now, Dad. He wasn't just reading lessons. He was discovering a blueprint for a life well lived. That weekend changed him. When he returned home, he hugged Rachel longer than usual. Thank you, he whispered. She raised an eyebrow. For what? He didn't explain. He just smiled. Over the next few months, Mason did small things differently. He started leaving his phone in a drawer during dinner. He began writing notes to Rachel and placing them under her coffee mug in the morning. He took Jake fishing, even though neither of them knew what they were doing. He helped Madison build a bookshelf for her growing collection. He started reading again. He called his sister in Texas just to talk. And on Sundays, instead of watching TV all day, he'd go on long walks and think. One day, Mason gathered enough courage to talk to Rachel about the old fishing store idea. He expected an eye roll or a cautious, maybe later. But instead she said, "I remember you used to light up talking about that." Her support was all he needed. Over the next year, Mason slowly transitioned out of his finance job and opened a modest fishing shop by the river. It wasn't fancy, but it was his. He named it exactly as he'd dreamed, Walker's Real World. It wasn't a booming success right away, but the happiness it brought him was immeasurable. Customers became friends. Local teens came in asking for advice. Veterans shared fishing tales. It became more than a store, it was a space for connection. One evening, an elderly man named Charles walked in, bought a single hook, and stayed for an hour talking about life. "You've built something special here," Charles said. "Not just a store. A little piece of peace." Mason nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. A few years later, when Mason turned 60, his family surprised him with a celebration at the store. The place was filled with friends, neighbors, and people whose lives he'd quietly touched. Rachel gave a small speech. "Mason taught us that it's never too late to live fully. He's proof that when you embrace life's deeper lessons, you see everything differently." As he looked around, Mason realized something powerful. He hadn't added years to his life. He'd added life to his years. That night, after the party, Mason returned to the cabin alone. He sat in his father's recliner again, the old journal in his lap. There was one page he hadn't turned to before. It was dated the year before his dad passed. "Final lesson," it read. "You only get one shot at this, son. Make it beautiful even if it's messy. Love hard. Laugh loud. Be kind. And always, always go fishing." Mason closed the journal, tears in his eyes. He finally understood. Life wasn't about perfection but about presence. Not about chasing more but appreciating enough. The beauty wasn't in the milestone birthdays or the job titles. It was in small, meaningful choices made each day. From that day on, Mason continued to live differently. He volunteered at youth centers, took Rachel dancing every other Friday, and taught Jake how to repair boats. Madison went off to college with a firm sense of what a life of meaning looked like, thanks to her dad's example. Years later, when Mason's own grandchildren asked about the little journal framed on his shop wall, he smiled and said, "That was the beginning of my real life." Then he'd sit them down and tell them the lessons he learned, not from school or business meetings, but from quiet reflection and love-filled actions. "Once you know these life lessons," Mason would say, "you'll see everything, your time, your people, even yourself, through a different lens. And that's when life really begins." And in those moments, the ripple effect of a father's wisdom continued shaping the world, one story, one choice, and one heart at a time.